Rich, you found another unicorn. Someone doing worthwhile breathwork research.
Oh, what do you mean another one?
Oh, I was thinking you would be the first one.
No, stop it. You didn't have to say that.
Well, yeah, I did because you WhatsApped me about it saying I have to mention that. But no, really interesting guy. What's he called? Where's he come from?
Well, you've just said his name, Guy. He's an interesting guy. He's one of the interesting guys. His name is Guy Fincham. He is a University of Leeds graduate where, all the top lads are me, Keir Starmer, Tolkien, and Guy Fincham. He is doing proper research on breathwork. The world needs it, and he's doing it in a very rigorous way. So we're going to find out things like why he's getting so much criticism for his research, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a really nice integrity about him in terms of being very upfront about limitations of his studies and how some of them didn't necessarily show what he thought they were going to, and that kind of brings a little bit more trust to what he's doing, and kudos.
Yeah, he's talks about his lived experience of breathwork because he's got his own issues with, he's had his own health challenges that he did breathwork for, and kind of came to the conclusion that he was doing the wrong type of breathwork for his condition, and how that led him to different types of breathwork and different modalities to research.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the following his heart, I suppose. He's voting with his feet, isn't he? He's like dedicating his life to researching what has been so impactful for him. So it comes back to that authenticity. It's been it's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and it is great to have a proper academic on because, one, because, no, I wasn't saying I'm not a proper academic.
Yourself.
No, I mean, it's good to have an academic breathworker on another one because as great as most breath workers are, there are a lot of breath workers out there who just don't have such a deep understanding. I mean, there can't be many people who have as deep an understanding of the mechanisms behind breath work than Guy. So I think we're really getting, A grade 5-star information in this podcast.
Totally agree. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, are you ready to kickstart your health journey and experience true transformation? Let me introduce you to a brand new program I'm thrilled to be a part of called Momentum, created in collaboration with Runga. Momentum is a 12-week immersive coaching program designed to guide you through every aspect of health transformation, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual. Think of it as the foundation you need to build a life of limitless energy, resilience, and personal power. Now, you might be wondering what sets Momentum apart. Well, the core of this program is breathwork, rooted in the clinical trial I conducted for my PhD. This trial showed breathwork's incredible ability to reduce anxiety with a large effect size and statistical significance, making it a true game changer in mental health. With Momentum, you get the best of both worlds. Live monthly breathwork ceremonies that allow you to experience these benefits firsthand, and a full library of recorded sessions. This means you can learn at your own pace on your own schedule from anywhere around the world. Plus, to keep you supported and inspired, we're including live support calls with our elite team. Momentum is about making you the best version of yourself in just 90 days, and Runga's expert coaching is designed to help you achieve exactly that. To get started, visit runga.co and join us in building the foundation for a healthier, more fulfilled you. The world is moving faster than ever. Don't wait to bring your inner world up to speed. Join today by going to runga.co/momentum.
Guy, thank you very much for joining us. Simple one to start you off, hopefully. How did you get into breathwork?
So it's a fairly long story. I'll try.
That's fine.
I'll give it the medium story. All started from my undergraduate degree. I was introduced to meditation during my exchange year in UC Berkeley in California. I just became really interested in mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism, And I was actually originally studying international business. And when I completed my degree, I moved to China to study Mandarin. And whilst I was there, I was also working in a startup, and I didn't really feel extrinsically sort of motivated. And my health wasn't the best it could have been. And I don't know, I just didn't feel like I had a clear purpose. But I was always interested in meditation and mindfulness, and I looked into research in that topic. And there were people such as Professor John Kabat-Zinn in America, and then Professor Mark Williams in Oxford, and they were conducting research on meditation and mindfulness. And I thought, oh wow, that's something I like to do. Why don't I devote my life to that, to researching meditation and mindfulness, something that I'm interested in. So I applied for a master's conversion in psychology at St Andrews in Scotland. I left China, went to India and Sri Lanka on my way back, and took part in some very intensive silent meditation retreats just to become more familiar with the topic. When I got to St Andrews, I was completing my master's. I was starting my thesis on meditation, and at the end of the first semester, I then developed chronic fatigue syndrome. So it forced me to take a 2-year leave of absence from a 1-year master's program. So it turned into a 3-year master's basically. But during this time, it was also, I think the pandemic happened a year into my leave of absence. And during this time, I came across a guy called Wim Hof. It's quite famous, obviously. And I came across him through a paper, actually. It was a really famous paper in a really big journal called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it really grasped my attention, because this paper was basically saying, you can influence your own physiology, your own immune response through breathing. You can alter, what's going on with your nervous system just through the breath. And that blew my mind. And so I just became obsessed with breath work. I kind of moved away from the observation of breath in mindfulness practices to control of breath in breath work. And then I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast one night, and James Nestor was on, the author of Breath, and he mentioned people like Richard Brown and Patricia Gerbarg, these medical doctors and psychiatrists in New York. And I trained with them as a breathwork teacher and took part in all of their workshops and practiced frequently, and actually managed to cure my chronic fatigue syndrome. Breathwork was a big part of that. There were many other things as well, but breathwork was key to my own personal sort of healing journey. And then I decided to completely switch up my research ambitions. I found a doctoral fellowship from this Sasakawa Young Leaders Fellowship Fund in Tokyo, in Japan, and they funded me for 3 years for my PhD at the School of Psychology at Sussex. And yeah, this is the first, sort of fellowship of its kind in the UK, and it was solely focused on breath work. And I got my PhD recently, about a month ago. And
congratulations!
Yeah, thank
Congrats,
you. And now moving over to Brighton and Sussex Medical School to conduct postdoctoral research. So yeah, it's been quite the journey, but it's been good. It's been
amazing.
Good. Yeah.
If I could go back, so Rich will probably know this, but I don't know if many of our listeners will. I mean, hearing that breath work actually helped, chronic fatigue syndrome, what does that practice look like? How do you think that's doing that?
Yeah, so originally, as I said, I got into breathwork through Wim Hof method. And these are rounds of cyclic hyperventilation with retention. And initially, I was finding that this kind of practice was helping me with my relapses. And in hindsight, it was probably just the fact that, I was just dumping loads of adrenaline, and it was just helping me manage life in that moment. I was very stressed. So I actually told Richard Brown and Patricia Gerbarg about this. I'm practicing the Wim Hof method, and they said, well, maybe long term, that isn't what you need. Maybe you need to focus on more gentle practices from Qigong, from yoga, from all around the world, more accessible practices with breathing and movement and some meditation. So it was kind of those modalities which help the most with me in terms of a long-term sort of healing, instead of just maybe just sticking, kind of like the fast-paced breathing might have just been like kind of sticking a plaster on my symptoms in the moment, just helping me deal with trying to make sense with my life at that moment. But it's really the sort of the accessible practices that really like probably shifted my recovery in the right direction long term.
Yeah, that aligns with a previous guest and a listener of our show, James Dowler. I did my conscious connected breathwork training with him and Breath Guru, and he had chronic fatigue, and he kind of realized, the over breathing, high ventilation breathwork stuff is not so good for him and his chronic fatigue. And he thinks it's more about nervous system regulation for him. And so you've done a lot of research, Guy. That's why we've got you on here as a person who's done more research than I think maybe anyone else on breathwork. I'm not sure if you've got the most published studies, but you haven't. You can correct me there. We can answer that. You don't think so? Okay.
You have for this. You have for our listeners. Yeah,
you're up there. You're in my top 3. But there's so many mechanisms of actions on conscious connected breathwork. So I do also want to come to coherent breathing and Wim Hof later, but conscious connected breathwork, that's the main one I teach. That's the one I did my research on. So one, how do you define conscious connected breathwork? And 2, what do you think the main mechanism of action is?
So conscious connected breathing, CCB, is usually taught in a fast-paced manner, not necessarily a rapid, like Kapalabhati or Bhastrika where you do it very rapidly, but a breathing at a rate where you can either increase the rate or depth, so it isn't normo ventilation. So it's high ventilation breathwork. You're actually blowing off enough, CO2 to kind of get these sort of effects that you can get from conscious connected breathing. But the key is there's no pause. So after a while, it's not uncommon for, after 5-10 minutes of doing it, it's not uncommon for practitioners to report that the breath kind of becomes warm because there's no start in between it. So that's a good place to get to for practitioners with conscious connected breathing, in my opinion. Don't know what you think, but the mechanisms, there's so many potential ones. In terms of basic physiology, the fact that you're blowing off CO2, and CO2 is a vasodilator, so therefore your blood vessels are constricting, so you get vasoconstriction because there's an absence of CO2, and this basically reduces cerebral blood flow to the brain, and this can cause hyperexcitability. There's so many different things that could be happening. We don't know, but we've kind of hypothesized in one of our papers from Alessandro Colasanti and Amy Cotard that essentially what you're doing through this hyperventilation or rapid intense conscious connected breathing, your brain is making predictions of your bodily, the environment, what's going on with your body, and your body's sending interoceptive feedback to the brain, right? So your body's predicting, everything. It wants to keep everything in a stable manner, so it's sensing what's happening in the body, and if what's happening in the body isn't what the brain wants, it will try and correct that. So you're over breathing, you're sending this interoceptive signal from the lungs to the brain, saying, you're hyperventilating. The brain wants to stop that. It wants to say, stop over breathing. So you again get this mismatch between what your brain's saying and what your body's saying. And this results in something like it's called a prediction error. You get prediction error overload. And what we've kind of hypothesized is that through your brain taking top-down control and discounting your interoceptive bodily signals, you are, you're ignoring what's going on in your body. You're causing all of these changes, respiratory alkalosis, pH going up, major changes in neuroexcitability in the brain. You're ignoring all of that, and this might be why it kind of causes a sort of depersonalization in a positive way. Many people report sort of oceanic boundlessness, becoming one, and some people report, kind of out of body experiences. And instead of it being a negative, it's actually turns out to be a positive experience for many people who practice CCB. So if you think at the opposite end of depression and health anxiety or fatigue, where you might become hyper focused on what's going on in your body, you're actually doing the opposite with the breathwork, because discounting it completely, what's happening in the body, you're kind of causing this kind of, for lack of a better word, shit show in the body, and your brain doesn't know what's going on, and you're just ignoring it because you're taking top-down control and you're overriding the interoceptive sort of signals and instructions that your body's sending back to your brain. But then again, there's so many other mechanisms as well. But I think from a sort of, overall perspective, if you want to just look at it from a whole sort of system level, I think that's a good place to start, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, maybe it's serotonin, maybe it's DMT, there's so many things, but they're very small. I think we're trying to think even more sort of bigger picture, what could be going on, and it's not, so it's kind of like a disruption of this metacognitive layer, and so you no longer have this meta stability, and I think that could plausibly be what's going on, but need more research to do all these things. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's great. The DMT one, it annoys me a little bit because it's like the sexiest one, but it's the one that the basic breath worker just loves to shout about.
DMT being what?
The active ingredient in ayahuasca, so it's dimethyltryptamine, and every breath worker who's just, they've only ever listened to podcasts and done a weekend training, they're like DMT, but it's so much more complicated than that. Maybe it is DMT, maybe there is some DMT as well, but I don't think there's much evidence for that. I really like that explanation, Guy. I also liked Martha Havaneth's one that she did with Robin Carhart Harris, the sort of the similarities with serotonin. I can't explain it right now, but is there a paper people can find with your explanation for that?
Yeah, sure. So we published a review in neuroscience and biobehavioral reviews. And it's the first part of the paper. It's high ventilation breathwork. So that's all you need to Google, and it gives you a long list of different types of practices, and it touches very much on conscious connected breathing, on CCB. And CCB, conscious connected breathing, is used in other kind of forms of breathwork, like for example rebirthing or holotropic breathwork. Overall, kind of broadly speaking, people have their different sort of practices, and different names for them. But I think generally what we're talking about when we're talking about high ventilation breathwork is conscious connected breathing. But again, there are so many elements that go with conscious connected breathing, right? Setting, facilitator, the priming, what you do at the start, integration, what you do after. I think they're just as important as the breathwork itself. And the breathing is just a catalyst for change, in my opinion.
What advice would you give? It just occurred to me, what advice would you give to someone thinking about doing this kind of breath work? Because some of the things you've described, and certainly some of my experiences in my first session, were actually quite difficult. There's weird stuff going on. As you said, it's a bit of a shit show. So what advice would you give to people looking into this?
So you raise a really good point. That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to know what you could potentially be getting yourself into.
All right.
So I think if breathwork teachers who are offering these sort of classes aren't providing some kind of informed consent and giving you a list of potential contraindications beforehand, then I think that's a red flag, in my opinion. People with epilepsy, a history of epilepsy, for example, this isn't a good idea, because hyperventilation lowers the threshold for an epileptic seizure. Because I was just talking about the neuroexcitability in the brain. It's synonymous in a way with an epileptic seizure. So pay much more attention if you have a history of that or you're prone to that. Hyperventilation can cause, panic attacks. So panic disorder is another contraindication. Read into, what people are saying on their websites or what courses they're providing. Just make sure that they are like giving the complete full picture, and obviously taking safety very seriously. And obviously you don't do any of this stuff in an environment which isn't safe.
Right.
That's the first thing to say. It has to be in a safe environment. But yeah, it's funny because my favorite sort of practice are these slow and gentle ones, but I still came into it through a fairly intense practice with the Wim Hof method, where there were breath holds in there, but it was still pretty intense. So I think it's good to kind of start slow in breath work. Even I didn't do that myself, but in hindsight, maybe it could have been better to, sort of start with these gentle practices before, learn to walk before you run, So yeah, I think it's just maybe play around with the more simple practices first. And then when you're comfortable with, controlling your breath in certain ways, then it might unlock another level to your sort of conscious connected breathing practice.
So I've got a nice segue for that. So coherent breathing, that would be classed as a gentler one, but you had a study that found that didn't work. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, that's that would be a journalist title for sure. And I've been getting feedback from people about, the kind of way I've presented these findings. But essentially what we did for that study, it was the first empirical study of my PhD, and we had one group do coherent breathing at 5.5 breaths per minute, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out with no pauses. So in a sense, in a conscious connected breathing way, but just not at a speed which would elicit the sort of changes that you get in high ventilation breath work. And we compared this to breathing at 12 breaths per minute as the placebo group. And we took, standard mental health measures before and after. It was 4 weeks. It was all online. There were 400 people. And yeah, we saw decreases in stress, saw improvements in well-being, saw decreases in anxiety and depressive symptoms at post-intervention and at follow-up. So 4 weeks post-intervention, 4 weeks follow-up. But there were no differences between the groups on the improvements. So as a good clinical trialist, you have to say, the simplest explanation to this is that coherent breathing, as it was delivered in this setting, 10 minutes a day, online, unguided, self-care, for 4 weeks is no more effective than a placebo of 12 breaths per minute. But there's always nuance there, and there could be many other explanations for that. I have a bunch of qualitative data that I supervised someone on analyzing, and it shows, going through these responses, it shows that people had really good experiences with both of the practices. So it kind of draws into question, was the control group just in itself, through just focusing on one's breathing for 10 minutes a day for 4 weeks, just also beneficial as well? And I was probably guilty of having an overly reductionist approach to this, but my sort of interest was really reducing it down to the breath rate, just to see if there was a difference. And in this case, there wasn't.
Coherent breathing, just for my benefit, is usually used to just calm the nervous system.
Yeah, I would say so. I think breathing sort of, if you do equal inhales, equal exhales, it's more of a balancing. And then obviously if you extend the exhale, I think that's a more conducive to deeper relaxation and kind of downshifting. So for me, I would practice, equal inhale, equal exhale in the daytime, and then at night I would keep increasing the exhale out until it gets to like kind of a 1-2 ratio.
And you ran another study on Wim Hof breathing that also didn't outperform a placebo. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I took a very similar design. This was my second empirical study for the PhD, and yeah, the primary time point of post-intervention, we got the same sort of results with the decreases in stress, but no difference in the magnitude of the difference between the groups. So again, as a good clinical trialist, you have to say the most parsimonious or most simplest explanation is that the placebo was not more effective. The intervention was not more effective than the placebos. In this study, the intervention was all online, unguided, self-help essentially. It was 3 weeks, 20 minutes per day. The Wim Hof style breathing was a day, the Wim Hof relation, with retention increasing from 45 to 90 seconds, so 45 seconds, 60 seconds, with 15 breaths per minute, really short holds. We blinded the trial and put it in a way that everyone thought that they were doing fast breath work, and it was all done through the mouth. There were no differences, in terms of the same for the coherent breathing study. There were no differences in the expectancy and the credibility of the interventions, and people weren't sure if they were in the intervention or the control. So we designed some really stellar placebos for this. And yeah, I think it's just a good practice I think it's a good thing to do early on and in a field where hype can kind of, outpace evidence and evidence basis. In hindsight, I wish I could have had the sessions, at least for the first one, delivered in person or on Zoom, just to ensure that participants were performing the interventions appropriately and they were adhering to it. But alas, you don't have infinite study resources as a PhD student, but my interest is moving more towards, doing the in-person, or at least, facilitators being present for the first session at least, just to ensure that people are doing what they say they're doing.
Yeah, I found the same thing with my clinical trial. Is we kind of had two experiments in that we had live Zoom sessions for the conscious connected breathing, and we had amazing results with that. Huge reductions in anxiety versus the control group. We had obviously a very weak control, as in we just had people on a wait list, which is a fair criticism there. But then we also had this sort of moderating variable where we had people doing 10 minutes of recorded conscious connected breathing, and we told them, do this as much as you can, and then at the end, we asked people, how often did you do the recording? And we found no difference between the people who did it every day and the people who didn't do it at all. So, these 3 studies of ours point to maybe it's the recording that's the variable that's making things much less effective. Potentially
that's really interesting. Yeah. I'd love to see this. I want to see this.
Yes. Well, Nature Scientific Reports are looking at part 1, and then I need to put it to part 2. The moderating variable. I need to write that up. But you can have my PhD dissertation. That'll be on ProQuest soon.
Oh, sweet.
After the second study, were you losing a bit of heart on your PhD, Guy? I suppose 2-part question as well. Did you get some criticism for the research, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I've got loads of criticism on Twitter, but X, but it's not a real place, so it's all good.
Sticks and stones.
I don't mind as long as it raises awareness about breathwork. I'm happy. I'm not in it to promote a certain type of breathwork. I just want to share knowledge about it. I think it's funny. When I have had criticism before, it's quite obvious that people haven't even read the first sort of paragraph of the paper, So I don't take it personally at all. But I'm not losing. I didn't lose heart because I think the placebos they're really good. I kind of thought, am I inadvertently creating a second intervention here? And to me, the placebo is the meat of medicine. To me, I think it's really important. I think I'm quite happy that both groups improved the primary time. I don't mind if, I think, honestly, to me, it's a better result than if breathwork outperformed the quote placebo. It doesn't matter to me either way.
Yeah, whenever I put out anything sort of moderating breathwork on Instagram, I put a video saying you can do too much conscious connected breathing, you can potentially affect your carbon dioxide tolerance. I got a lot of people just being like, you can't say anything bad about conscious connected breath work. Like this is nonsense and stuff. I was like, what am I saying is nonsense? And like, I did reach out to these people and effectively, so many people have just black and white thinking. It's like you have to only say good things about breath work because, well, the people I was speaking to were just practitioners. So, any negatives is going to take away from their cash flow. But as an academic, you're really like told you really need to find your criticisms. You need to put the limitations in there. You need to put the generalizability section in there. And the more criticism you have of yourself, the more credibility you actually have. Whereas in social media, it's like, no, any kind of moderating is just a red flag.
And you can apply this to everything, right? You can apply this to exercise. Sometimes doing too much exercise can damage you, right? It's sometimes it's not healthy to over exercise, or sometimes maybe, I don't know, if you're on a ketogenic diet, too much fat maybe isn't so good. I think there's a nuance to it all. And the same with breath work. Maybe, if you're doing too much breath work in a day, maybe you're neglecting other areas of the life, like relationships or whatever. Yeah, I think it applies to everything. Too much sun exposure, not good. Too little, also not. There's a whole spectrum.
Getting into Jack Kruse territory. I know you're a fan.
No comment.
No comment. Have I outed you as a Jack Kruse follower?
I wouldn't say I'm a fan. I think it's good to provide nuance for everything. I think light is a very important tool. Is that even a thing? Light, it's nature. Getting back to nature is a good thing. I think we're seeing that. I think spending time outdoors is very important for our well-being and general mental health. But yeah, maybe I'm not a full on. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. There's no point even going into this territory now, is there?
Okay, change of direction. Right, Andy.
No, I'd love to know your thoughts.
On Jack Kruse, no.
Bit of background, please, for those that don't know Jack Kruse.
Jack Kruse, he's a medical doctor, biohacker type guy. He's all about light and the benefits of light for the mitochondria. But he's kind of, since the pandemic, gone, he lives in Panama or something now and hates the US government. And
El Salvador,
okay. And he's just very anti-establishment and he's just a very extreme person in his views. But yeah, I think that's enough said.
You should have my friend from medical school, Jack.
Okay.
You should have him.
All right, yes. Yeah. Yes, we'd love the intro.
What do you think of the hot topics then at the moment in terms of, like, obviously you both put research out there, you both had a fair share of criticism. I've no doubt Guy handled it better than Rich, but what are the hot topics that are still kind of being, I guess, hotly contested? What are the battlegrounds at the moment?
I'll let Richard answer that.
What are the battlegrounds? Well, yeah, there's one I've written down here that, there's just a lot of debunking that needs to be done, isn't it? One, we mentioned the DMT thing. The other one I can think of is that the reason CCB works is because it increases the amount of oxygen in the body. I would say that's a bit of a battleground, but I think most people know it's not. It's actually decreasing the amount and people understand the Bohr effect. But what do you think, Guy?
Yeah, I think, you're not super oxygenating. It's CO2 that's the important factor here, and you need CO2 present to liberate oxygen from hemoglobin. So yeah.
Any other battlegrounds you feel like, any other areas you want to tackle?
Not really. I mean, I do the research I do because I just want to know if breathwork can help people. Does it work for people? It's more important to me than why it works. So I understand people are very interested in the mechanism behind things, but for me, it's more about, does it help you? Be it physically, mentally, athletically. That was, you spoke about potentially doing some research and the sports side of things. And I think, if it's the good thing about the breath is that everyone can do it. It's accessible. You can't patent it. You can try, but you can't. There's nothing more decentralized than breathing. And I think that's the beautiful thing about breathwork is that you can do it anytime, anywhere, unless it's hyperventilation, then do it safely.
So what do you think are the key research questions that you and the academic world should be focusing on?
It's a good question. At the moment, I'm turning my attention towards altered states of consciousness and the effects on altered states of consciousness that can be induced and evoked by breathwork. There's a database, an open science project called Altered States Database, and they input data from psychedelic trials for different compounds, and you can look at the kind of phenomenological profile of these altered states of consciousness and then compare them to other modalities like breathwork. And that's what I'm quite interested in at the moment, because I think because of the psychedelic renaissance and the way research is going at the moment, that providing those kind of data on breathwork and comparing it to psychedelics can ignite a lot of interest. And then, through that, people will see that, it's not just hyperventilation. It's not just conscious connected breathing. It's all these other things as well. And I think it's really important just to acknowledge the roots of breathwork. So the most well-known body of practices, comes from pranayama, which is a classical limb of yoga. Prana means self-regulation, sort of control, or prana being the life force or vital energy, can be synonymous with breath, but isn't breath, because, prana is the universal energy. It just is what it is. And then ayama is a regulation of or control of, stop, start. So it's kind of regulating one's breath, essentially, albeit not exactly. But yeah, I think it's just important to acknowledge the roots first before, we're a bunch of white guys talking about conscious connected breathing, but it's much deeper than that, and it goes back, centuries. It's probably 10,000 years ago, taught via shamans and whatever race, whatever color, it doesn't matter. I think the beautiful thing again about the breath is that it's accessible to all. And yeah, I think it's just a beautiful thing.
But bearing in mind how long it has been around and obviously all the different permutations and stuff, as two researchers in the field, are you kind of surprised of the gaps in the research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am really surprised. Yeah. So yeah, that's such a good point. I believe the first kind of study published on in the Western world, at least, was 60 years ago. So I think 1964. I think there's a paper by, I forgot the name. I think it's Higashi from Japan. Looking at pranayama, looking at a specific practice of pranayama. But if you went to, India, then this has been used for thousands of years, and they didn't have scientific papers to back it up. I view the time period we're in right now for breathwork as, I said this a few years ago, so I think I'm a bit off, but meditation in the 70s, 80s, you had just a few hundred papers. Fast forward to now, you get over 4,000 published per year. So like the increase has just been is huge, unprecedented. So I think we're getting to that point now with breathwork where, there's maybe a few hundred papers, well, probably maybe more, but it depends what you're classifying as breathwork. But I think we're kind of about to see that kind of blast off for breathwork research. So I hope I'm right, because I said this at the start of my PhD, and it still hasn't, seen this unprecedented surge like meditation has yet. But I think with the more research groups that are starting to take it more seriously, I think we're kind of at that cusp. And especially because it's got a strong link with psychedelics now through holotropic breathwork and rebirthing breathwork, I think that's only going to help, advance the field in terms of the number of publications. But the important thing is to do, good research on it from the outset, so you don't suffer from this sort of mismatch between the hype and then the evidence base. So that could be said of some meditation research, some mindfulness research, where you have these, thousands and thousands of papers, but many of them aren't, of high quality. So I think it's important to, whilst we're at this cusp, to really do solid research so it can, evolve in a evidence-based manner, and it doesn't just become a fad. Because I think people with lived experience of breathwork, I'm an example of someone with lived experience who really benefited from breath work. So it does work for people. It just maybe it doesn't work for the whole, general population, but for certain people it could be tremendously beneficial. So I think it's just, you don't need an RCT to say, oh, it's helpful, because it's always an N of one. Like, it's always what works for you. And there are so many different things that you can do. I'm going off on a tangent here, but there's so many things you can do to get to the place that of well-being, of flourishing. You could do yoga, you could do breathwork, you could do exercise, you could do diet, whatever. You're trying to get to that same spot. Like Mahatma Gandhi said, truth is one, paths are many, and there are so many paths that we can take, and it doesn't have to be breathwork.
Yeah. Well, I think breathwork will take off, Guy, when you start creating clinical trials that have positive results and have softer placebos.
Well, then that's the question, right? Like, the softer placebo, is it a form of breathwork?
Yeah.
Is it it's really hard to apply this model of clinical trials, randomized clinical trials. This is what I'm struggling with now, is that randomized clinical trials are designed for, pharmaceutical interventions. They're not lifestyle interventions. It's really hard to fit that kind of thing into an RCT, because the RCT design kind of dilutes the teaching it dilutes the lifestyle intervention that you're trying to study sometimes. So it's really hard to grasp between creating a placebo which maybe doesn't have any breath work involved in it at all, no pacing of breath, maybe just placing attention somewhere else, and then comparing that with conscious connected breathing, for example. So this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to, as I'm going forward with my research, is what is a good control group. And if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I really struggled with that, and then just went, okay, waitlist control. But I don't know, I was thinking like a journaling group or something like that would be just really easy, cost effective. Yeah, not 5 stars, but maybe halfway there. And yeah, going back to your point about who breathwork is effective for, I think is really key, because again, black and white thinking, people just want to know, does breathwork work? And then it's like, yes or no. Well, with CBT has a 48% response rate. So it doesn't work for the majority of people, but people are pretty happy with that. That's seen as the gold standard of therapy, and maybe breathwork works for 40% of people, and we're really happy for that. But then,
does breathwork work was the title of my thesis.
And is it just a simple yes no, right? That's all.
The answer, it's nuanced.
Right, that's a surprise.
Yes and no.
Okay. Sport as well. That's an area I think that there's not been any research on CCB and sport. And Guy and I have had a chat about this with a connection that we have to a sporting person. We'll see whether or not it comes off. But yeah, I am also mega. Was so surprised when I did my literature review, and there's like 20 studies on conscious connected breath work. And even my supervisor was like, where there were studies, they thought I was just being lazy. I was just like, no, there's just no more studies. I can't do any more. So what do you think about sport and conscious connected breathwork, Guy?
Conscious connected breathwork in a fast sense? No,
I mean, I like it for athletes, because so many people, I think, in terms of research, there's so much exercise science out there, because people just love sport. So I'm wondering, can we jump on the tails of exercise science research with CCB?
But when you say conscious connected breathwork, CCB, what exactly do you mean in terms of the do you mean the normal practice of the high ventilation?
Yeah.
Okay, so. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, honestly. In terms of CCB for fast-paced breathwork for athletes, I think CCB at a lower rate, if you're doing conscious connected breathing, but a coherent breathing rate, maybe it could be beneficial for things like recovery.
Yeah,
even including physiological sighing after sessions, and maybe down regulating after training sessions, or doing coherent breathing before sessions to enhance, one's sort of focus and calm. I don't know about hyperventilating before. I don't know how I'd love to know more, and if you have any thoughts, how hyperventilation could help with sports performance.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Rich, because like having done it, I mean, a fair few times, you're almost advised to take it easy afterwards, aren't you? And before. And so there'd have to be quite a narrow window. Why would you think it would be good for sport?
I would just like to see the England football team doing conscious connected breathing in a game in the Euros final. They're running around there, and there's me on the side. They don't need Gareth Southgate. It's just me saying, "Relax your inhale. We're all one." No,
with sports science where it is, it must have been considered. But I'm just thinking, like, why would you think it would benefit?
I think it could help with performance anxiety and flow states. I think you could help people with like getting into that altered state, and then they're visualizing scoring the penalty. They're visualizing making the tackle. They're visualizing lifting the trophy. And maybe it's a type of visualization manifestation type benefit, or it's also, someone with performance anxiety. Why do they have it? Oh, it's because they have this unprocessed, maladaptively stored memory from 10 years old where their coach, humiliated them in front of everyone, and they've never gotten over that, and that's holding them back. Maybe you could get there with just, that with just regular psychotherapy, but yeah, maybe CCB speeds that process up.
Sure. I think anything that helps the human, flourish or improves their well-being would aid performance. So I guess, why I was confused at the start of the question was because I thought it was going to be more slow breathwork related, or even breath holding, right? Sort of oxygen advantage or something like that. But yeah, no, I think, if you can help the human, were you thinking conscious connected breathing sessions right before performing, or were you just thinking in general?
In general.
Surely not. Yeah.
Well, I think you could be onto something here, because I think it's a very physical intervention, right? You put a lot of effort into conscious connected breathing. At least at the start, you're putting a lot of effort into it. It's a very physically demanding task initially, and I think populations in sports, athletes, that's a kind of practice that could resonate with them, and that's why I hope to see, later down the line, sort of trials being done with veterans with trauma, and if a sort of physical intervention like this, a more somatic, cathartic thing like this, might be more well suited to populations which are used to doing quite physically demanding and challenging tasks, like veterans, athletes, military, fire service, that sort of thing. I think people maybe have elevated levels of stress in those populations, of intervention of this kind could resonate with them more than psychotherapy and let's sit down and talk. Maybe they want to, maybe using the body more could be of more benefit to them. So yeah, I think you could be onto something there. I like it.
Yeah, and the oxygen advantage stuff I think is also relevant as well. There's a fair few studies on repeated sprintability and breath hold, especially with rugby players, and I'm in touch with a previous guest, Gray Cause, now that I am oxygen advantage certified, so go me. More research is on its way, hopefully related to that.
I really like this question. It's one that Rich came up with.
Thanks, mate.
Ask it. But does this, like the scientific work, the research, kind of, I guess, undermine some of the spiritual, religious history of the practice? Is it kind of like taking away some of the magic, if you like?
Absolutely. That touches on what we were talking about earlier, the cultural roots, but then also the RCT design, where you're just kind of reducing these practices down. What I did in the coherent breathing study, I was kind of trying to just isolate the breathing rate to see if there was an effect, but we didn't include the kind of psychoeducation in there, the kind of context of which it emerges. Coherent breathing is found independently across the world from different traditions. This sort of breathing, this sort of rate is found, in Buddhist meditation practice in Japan. Something called zazen, where they enter meditative states, but they actually breathe at this sort of rhythm. And then you can track it to other parts of the world where they have this similar rhythm as well, and they also during prayer in Italy. I think it's the Latin Hail Mary, where people are actually respiring at this rate, or a kind of coherent breathing rate. So yeah, I think this is what I'm kind of struggling with, is don't lose the magic of it through designing it. So in a sense, like people could be like, this is pointless, this is pointless because it's kind of defeating the purpose. But I'm still also trying to provide people who wouldn't otherwise be familiar with these practices actually be, in the Western world, where it might make it a bit more accessible for them. And maybe that in a way is also creating its own magic, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Piquing curiosity and attention. I think it's hard. It's really hard, but it could be doing that, but also more people could be getting exposed.
I think the latter, what you just said. I think some people do need that like evidence, like that hardcore evidence base. Okay, this works, and then they'll experience the magic for themselves.
It makes me think of birthday cakes. People are like, if you did a scientific study on the birthday cake, why do people love them? It'd be like, well, people just love the glucose molecule. But it's not. It's the cake, it's the jam, it's the different textures, it's the candles, it's the lights going on, it's the people singing happy birthday with you, it's the attention you get on you, it's the song. It's just so many component parts that add up instead of just glucose.
I was speaking to it was a couple of years ago, a guy who was setting up gyms in psychiatric wards, and we were just having a discussion about diet, and he was saying, someone who with a mental health condition in psychiatric wards, it could be healthier for them to all be eating ice cream together than for them to be, alone in their room eating a bowl of kale. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like there's the whole community aspect around food as well, around the birthday cake. It's more than the component parts. It's fascinating. I think there's a lot of nuance to all of it, and I think that's why group sessions in breathwork can be really transformative. The group element. And magical things can happen when you're in a group doing this, and it's not just you by yourself.
Yeah. I think that would be a really interesting study, group breathwork versus individual one-to-one breathwork. And there was that study, the Havanith one, where they had a placebo. They had people just doing regular breathing, and they were measuring their altered states. And the people in the placebo who were just breathing as normal had altered states because of, they put it down to social contagion. So just being in a room with people in altered states creates altered states. A bit like when you go to a nightclub and you're not drinking and everyone else is wasted, you feel a little bit drunk.
Good point. Placebo, is that placebo? Is that the power of the mind? What is it?
Could be.
So what's next for you then, Guy? You mentioned transferring to the medical school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I will be at the medical school for at least the next year or so, whilst I'm also applying for sort of postdoc fellowships and much longer term funding. But at the moment, my interest is focused mostly on high ventilation breathwork, conscious connected breathing, and these altered states of consciousness, and whether they can sort of mediate or at least correlate with changes or improvements in mental health and well-being. I'm also analysing some pilot data, some qualitative data that I had left over from my PhD. There's several things going on at the moment, but that's the main focus right at this time. But there's lots of stuff happening, and I'm involved with a trial on using sort of Wim Hof style breathing for menopausal symptoms, hot flashes. And I'm also on a grant with a university in the Netherlands, Maastricht, and it's on sort of this conscious connected breathing, delivering it remotely to people with social anxiety disorder. So I think that's kind of all of the projects that I can really manage at the moment.
Sounds like a lot.
But it's a lot more people now are starting to like reach out to me, and I think I'm trying to also protect my time as well, so I can actually keep doing the research that I'm doing. That's why I'm doing this, right? So it's to do the research. I want to keep doing that. So I'm just trying not to get too distracted. But we also we filmed for a documentary on breathwork at the medical school, and the director of that is talking with various streamers, and yeah, that will be out at some point in I don't know, maybe next year or the year after. But yeah, there's lots of stuff in the pipeline, but I'm used to that because science and scientific research moves quite slow. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, but yeah, I'm used to it.
And how do people find you?
Easiest way to find me is just at breath_guy on Twitter, X.
Twitter, and you're on LinkedIn as well, quite active there.
I am on LinkedIn. Yeah, sorry.
Guy Fincham on.
Guy Fincham.
Yeah, it might be Guy William. I think
Guy William.
My middle name's William, so it could be Guy William Fincham. But yeah, if you want to just check out studies that I'm sharing, breathwork studies and thoughts on breathwork, then yeah, breath_guy on X is the best.
Excellent.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Guy.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Guy. I
you.
really appreciate your time.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Yeah, really enjoyed that. I've got to say, I think that's one of the best questions you've ever written on any one about the. No, I mean it this time. I really do. Because I had about 3 weeks ago, almost to the day, I had a breathwork experience that I would put as one of the best moments of my entire life. And if someone tried to explain that to me with kind of science, I just don't think I'd be able to get there. So it's good that he also acknowledges the sort of the magic, the spiritual element to breathwork, as well as trying to find out the sort of mechanics and the science behind it. So I found that bit really, really interesting.
Yeah. Science is obviously reductionistic deliberately, and it is almost impossible to capture the full spectrum of experience from breathwork. I've got a lot of, like Guy, I've got a lot of qualitative data from my research that there's no place for it, but it's like, this stuff's changed my life. I can't believe I met my sister in spirit. I can't believe these things happened. And you can't really, you can, but it's very difficult to quantify that. And randomized control trials, they're looking for the average results. I've talked about the kurtosis spread in my study, which means the variety of reductions in anxiety, and the kurtosis was huge. Some people had enormous reductions in anxiety from 6 weeks of conscious connected breath work, and some people had minimal changes, almost nothing. And you really need to go into detail to pass that out.
And I think that the sort of the magic of breath work is something really quite sacred. You talk about how long it's been being practiced, and also as you say, people have described things, but I don't think you'll ever really be able to describe with the science. So yeah, really enjoyed it. I didn't actually know where you were going with the birthday cake point, so I'm glad that actually kind of
had a point. What were you thinking?
Like birthday cakes, and I was like, what?
You thought I just wanted to talk about birthday cake?
Talking about birthday cakes, I thought, shit, if I missed his birthday, what's going on here? Is this like? That's good analogy.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, lots of compliments for me today. Good. One other thing I would like to mention is the history of conscious connected breathwork is surprisingly short. So yes, pranayama goes back centuries, and Tumo, aka Wim Hof, goes back a long time. But as far as we know, Stanislav Grof invented conscious connected breathing in the 60s and 70s. So it is relatively recent. It depends what you describe as conscious connected breathing, but certainly holotropic breath work was invented by him, and then they've got the derivatives of that, such as transformational breath work and clarity breath work and rebirthing and breath guru, the ones that you have just done. So yeah, in that sense, it's less surprising that there hasn't been so much research because it is relatively recent.
Yeah. Well, keep doing the work, you guys, Guy and Rich, please. Just keep bringing attention to the subject.
Yes, will do. All right.
Listening. Where do they find us, Rich?
They find me at The Breath Geek, although I may change it to Dr. Breath Geek any day now.
Can't wait for the relaunch, the revamp.
The revamp. And at Andy Esam. And we're laughing through the pain, navigating wellness on all good podcast hosting websites, platforms, and even a lot of the bad platforms.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.